Hello, friend. The mystical American Patriots Society is transmitting to you from beneath 4 million cubic feet of solid granite, in the burning heart of the Yellowstone caldera. This is a variety program for normal sandwich-eating Americans with some concerns about living in a deranged, post-Christian technocracy. So, keep your third eye on the sky and your ear to the ground, as Sumo and Smokestack connect your main brain vein to a higher plane. Are you ready? Stand by.
Smokestack? Smokestack, are you there?
I'm under attack!
Smokestack, come in. Are you there? Hello?
I'm under attack!
Smokestack! Smokestack!
Take that, you
Hello,
monsters!
are you there? Is everything okay?
Help me! Help me, Sumo!
The Illuminati found him! Alright, no, I can't lose another clone this way. Okay, hold on.
Help me, Sumo!
If you can hear me, I'm gonna hack the mainframe and activate the defense systems!
They're attacking me! You gotta defend me! They're breaching the perimeter!
I'm hacking it now! Hang on! Oh, okay. Hold on. They locked me out. DDoS attack. Okay. Alright, hold on. Hang on.
You gotta hurry, Sumo! I'm not gonna make it much longer!
No!
They're surrounding me! I'm hurt!
Okay.
I'm hurt, Sumo!
Who is it? Can you see who it is? Is it the Grays? NWO?
No, it's...
Club of Rome, Bilderberg!
They're robots with rubber skin, and they're wearing priest collars around their neck.
It's Robo-Jesuits. Okay. Hold on, Alright,
It's the Jesuits.
I think I've almost got the terminal mainframe activated.
I'm dying.
Okay, the defense system should be coming online now.
It's working. It's repelling them. I think it's working, but I'm hurt.
Okay.
I'm hurt, Sumo. You gotta help me.
Okay, alright, I need you to... Alright, okay.
I'm bleeding out.
I need you... There should be some non-embryonic stem cells in the cabinet behind you. Do you see them?
Yeah, I found him.
Alright, inject that into your arm. Inject it into your arm right now. Yeah, it's a big... How's that?
I think it's working.
Okay, it's working?
I think it's working.
Good. How much... Okay. Did they breach the bunker?
Yeah,
your immune
there's
system,
germs coming in.
I think, okay. The stem cells will hold out. We have...
But I think the stem cells are working.
Okay.
Woo.
Excellent. Yeah.
Okay.
Woo. I should have expected that. I should have expected that. We're supposed to be contacting number 15 today.
Oh, good.
And the Jesuits cannot... Ever since number 15 fought off the Greys in 2011 and stopped their takeover, him and the rest of the Wingmakers, they haven't been onto it. Are you okay? Are you able to continue?
Yeah, I'm actually feeling a lot better.
Yeah, stem cells are miraculous. Look, we're going to... I have to relocate you to another bunker later.
Okay.
Because that one's not hermetically sealed anymore.
Oh, the germs are going to get me eventually, yeah.
Yeah, we got to refresh the seal. All right, hold on. I'm gonna hack into the Usenet here and contact number 15.
Okay. It's a good thing we kept Usenet servers running all this time.
Right. All right, hold on. I'm plugging in the... All right, I'm hacking the Usenet, entering the DDoS here. Got the Megs. Okay, inserting the Betamax. Okay, it should be coming online now. Number 15, are you there? Number 15?
Yo, can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you. There you go. We got him. We just suffered a tremendous attack by the Jesuits, but we repelled them. So we don't have a huge lot of time. This afternoon we'll have to change Smokestack to a new base.
Did you throw the holy hand grenade at them?
We did.
We did, yeah.
Both literally and metaphorically.
Good. Sprinkle some holy water on them, short circuits them, they fall apart.
Number 15, the CEO of Earth, as he's called. Welcome. This is every 7th episode to our listeners. We bring on a MAPS member from the wider MAPS community to discuss their views on the psycho-spiritual landscape around us as well. Now, I know this isn't the 7th episode. I know this is the 5th episode, but that's okay. It is the 7th episode, but we've had some. This comes out in nonlinear time, basically. Yeah, because of all the fracking and whatnot.
That makes sense.
Okay, so, woo! Hold on, I gotta reset there. That was a lot. Number 15, how you doing? It's been a long time. I haven't, not since we helped rig the 2016 elections.
Yeah, it's great. And then when y'all look forward to the 2020 ones, oh my goodness, you can't wait to see what happens. It's amazing. It's gonna blow your minds.
Yeah, and we're already in the process of screwing over Bernie.
Mm-hmm. It's good to see you too. The green screens, we actually reversed back in technology over the years. So seeing y'all through green screen actually feels very comforting to me.
I'm recording this call now on a CRTV, a CCTV, or CR monitor.
Awesome.
Yeah, third rate too. Yeah, it's pretty great. You got the little liney grains and everything. So how have you been, number 15? How's the family?
They're doing well. They're
They're
growing also in a non-linear fashion, as this podcast series is. Their growth is that same way. They seem to jump years and then revert back to younger years as they get older.
My children also
it shows in their development, in their behavior and that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Now, as I said, for those not familiar with number 15, he has a long history of subverting the Illuminati and all sorts of various other things.
I intentionally drive different ways home so that way they can't track me.
Yeah.
Always do that when you're driving. You always go different ways than you normally go.
Yeah, I do that too. Number 15, we've recently learned that the cloning process, this comes out in nonlinear time, so some of our takes and points are related to things that happened to the listener's view weeks and weeks ago. But that's okay. One of the reasons we brought on number 15 today, we want his insights, but we also want to discuss a project that he is currently heading for MAPS, which is this project to create a wiki of all biblical interpretations. Is that correct?
Yes. I thought this was a great idea from the sense that, so there's lots of different ways to view the Holy Book, the Scriptures. You've got the literal interpretation as most fundamentalists do, but then you also have other views, such as like the historical view, which is pretty obvious. It's like, did these things really happen? And there's some evidence to lend to support to that, and then corroborating that with what actually exists. But then the other views that I found more interesting, in which people like Jordan Peterson kind of brought to light, is the ideas of like, well, how do you look at the Bible from a psychological point of view? Here's this guy who I think had brought, he's like a modern day prophet in the sense that he's coming at it from a completely different angle than most people have actually looked at it. But, saying like, hey, the psychological community shows a lot of how these scriptures, these old stories, these ancient stories actually have psychological impact. They explain why we are the way we are, which to most modern readers who've, grown up in the church, they're like, well, yeah, no, duh, that makes sense. That's what we've always been told. But they haven't really looked at it and had the parallel support of, the modern day science to kind of say, yeah, but this explains why these stories speak to this level of truth in us that, has always been there. We just didn't know it until now, until we've had these modern experiments that kind of explain why this is, why the scriptures are true.
Yeah, it's like I keep coming back to, if you just remember the definition of words, everything makes so much more sense. Like psyche means soul, psychology means the study of the soul. It's like, of course this would have an overlap, right? It's like it's the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's a new, but there's so there's like the literal level, there's the poetic level, there's the psychological level, there's the symbolic level.
Yep, the metaphysical level. There's all
metaphysical
kinds.
level.
However you want it, ethical level.
The ethical, and then we're
all
going
the different ways you can approach it.
So what you're saying is that there's multiple non-contradictory layers of meaning to a piece of scripture?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, this is
because
cool.
the idea of truth is multi-layered, right? I mean, the most profound truths are those things that exist on multiple levels. It's something that can exist in the physical sense, and we would refer to that as in our sense as the literal, because we experience it. But then there's also, in a metaphorical sense, in the sense that it goes abstract, but it's also true and it makes sense in that context. And then there's also in the the psychological sense, that which our brains experience that truth. And then in metaphysical sense, in almost like in a spiritual enlightenment kind of way, there's when we say truth, we can mean that in multiple different fashions, but when it aligns across that whole spectrum, it's like absolute truth. And that's the problem that I've always had with absolute truth. When people say, what do you believe in absolute truth? It's like when everybody's like, well, truth is relative, and you get into these arguments with people about this kind of stuff. The only times that we experience absolute truth is when it's across multiple all those spectrums, which is it's really hard to understand, like, what is truth? Because it's really hard to pinpoint when it aligns perfectly across all those spectrums. But Scripture surprisingly seems to do that really well across multiple spectrums, which is why it is true.
Okay, so let me ask you like I guess a test case here. So I've heard people make the argument, oh well, Scripture isn't historically true. It's just a symbolically loaded story that we've come up with in antiquity to express certain things. For example, the 10 plagues. If you look at the way the 10 plagues go down, there's all this polemic in it against the deities of the Egyptians, and it's basically mocking them and inverting all their stuff. So, Moses, when he told the story of the Exodus, he came up with all these plagues that would have all this meaning, in rhetorically, polemically against the people that they left, their enemies, to show the power of Yahweh and all this stuff. And so what you're saying is, yes, it did have all this really cool symbolic polemical content, but the events that are described also actually happened.
Yes, it's the same kind of argument that people use for the existence of Jesus in the New Testament. It's kind of like, do you really think all these people would go around talking about this dead guy that came back to life and then risk their lives and be to the point of being boiled alive and crucified upside down for a belief in something that didn't happen? What kind of crazy people would do that? And people to this day go to their own deaths because of a belief that they share. But these people, I mean, they actually did that. If it was a lie, why would they do that?
Right.
It's the same thing in the Old Testament. I think they really did. And if you listen to a lot of historians, that's the part that I don't know fully. And I think there's a lot of, why the Wiki project would be so good is because you can bring all these experts and all these sources from all these different fields. Because all the time you listen to a lot of these historians, there's a lot of new findings that were like, oh, this actually confirms what we had thought happened. And it really did happen on maybe not to the extent that, we imagine happened, but it did happen in truth to an extent.
Well, I think when people look at Scripture, they see storytelling in it because it is so loaded on all these symbolic and rhetorical levels that it's the way that we write stories. And so they say, oh, well, it can't be literally true. Look, it's written like a story. But it's like, no, if the God of the universe, the creator God, really ordains the path of history, then it can be literally true and symbolically loaded at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and I would argue that is true all the time. Like, everything that you do is literally true, obviously, because you're living it, but also symbolically loaded. Like, Here's a good example, and this is one of the things the wiki is going to bring out. Like when it says in scriptures, when you go up, that's going to a better moral, spiritual place. But it's also physically up. Like, go up to the land I will show you, right? You go, because it's actually, in a geographical sense, Jerusalem is in a higher elevation than Egypt. Like, you go down to Egypt, but you go up to Jerusalem.
Okay.
Right? That's why holy places are always at the top of mountains, because it's both physically higher, but also spiritually higher. Right? There's the valley and the peak. That's like in the Bible, Christ always goes to the top of a mountain to pray, or to the top of a hill to pray. And so all these. That's why your feet. That's why the feet are always symbolically low. Like, I'm not even worthy to untie the straps of his sandals, because they're nearest the earth, right? So they're down low at the bottom. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And it makes sense even like from a psychological point. So what I mean by that is, like, you're using your example about how you go high and low, and we don't know is like which came first. Is it chicken or the egg? Did that literally happen in the sense that the person went low to Christ, and or in the sense that we think of going low, we experience pain, suffering when we bend over. As we get older, we bend over. Did this now become metaphorical, and that's why it's adapted into our language? But in another context, even like things that we can't explain, like when a person experiences shame, guilt, they'll put themselves lower. They'll bow themselves down lower to the ground. They'll bend over. It's like, what the heck? Why does this happen? It's because truths are multi-layered, and we don't even understand ourselves as to why these things, why we are the way we are. Yeah, but it's because of all these layers of truth that when you kind of see all these things from these different angles, you can see, oh, that makes sense when you see across all of it.
Yeah, symbolism happens. Like, one of the things I saw, which made me go, "Oh, okay, we're screwed." As now, as I told you, this comes out in nonlinear time, so everyone listening is probably already dead. But I watched the coronavirus patients that were being extradited back to the UK. Right, so they had been in China and they'd evacuated back to the UK. They were being led to the hospital for inspection on these buses. And there were 4 buses, right? And the company's name was Horsemen. So it was like the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse bringing these corona patients. And I was like, well, if that takes time, it's just one of those ways that symbolism happens in everyday life. If you have your eyes open to see it, you can. It's like there's something in the cosmos that overlays meaning onto things, and maybe that's what consciousness is the thing that lays meaning onto things. But this is all going to come through on the wiki. This is why I brought number 15 on. He's an expert in the subconscious, in the symbolic, and we're going to talk about the wiki, which is going to be funded by, of course, we're going to set up the Patreon, which primarily will go to such projects as this, and the Billboard project, and which I think I talked about in a different episode, which I hope has already come out. But it's hard to tell when you're jumping around the timeline.
I'd like to also build a particle decelerator.
Yeah, the particle decelerator, which is we're going to stop CERN.
Okay, good.
We have a lot of big projects going. And number 15 is here, and that's why today we're going to talk about, using his expertise from his years fighting the Greys. We're going to talk about the roots of SJWism and what faith is, and then move on to how to interpret dreams. You're going to help us interpret dreams.
Awesome.
Okay.
Sweet.
Okay. Great. So now number 15 has been at this for a long time, and he has seen well, obviously you helped with the fall of communism, with the fall of the Berlin Wall and all that. So I just wanted to take if if this take was accurate to you. It seems to me like one of the things we say in the intro of our show, which was done by our AI. So it only goes so far. But one of the things we say is a post-Christian society, right? And I got to thinking about that. I was like, really, I think SJWism, which is social justice warriorism, this modern wokeness, can actually be best described as a form of, it's really a Christian heresy. It's like a Christian sect, if you think about it. Like, okay, because they've just transmuted all the principles over, right? So instead of like the eschaton and the apocalypse, right, you've got climate change doomsday, which is still a death. It's still a death by fire, right? It's a death by heat.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, you've got original sin, which is this whiteness or privilege, right? It's something you're born with and you can't get out of it, right? You've got this Garden of Eden idea, which is the noble savage. Beforehand, everything was perfect until the sin came, right? You've got the way out of it is confessionatory. So you confess your privilege, your original sin, and you try to make atonement for it through putting yourself lower and sort of self-abasement, right? It's like all of the pieces are there of a Christian theology, just sort of shifted over like a phase length or something. Does that make sense? I was just toying with this idea that maybe this is just really what we're seeing is like a widespread Christian heresy, because it's based on, like, if you think of it, it's based on like a few. It's like what if love your neighbor meant hate yourself, right? And what if, yeah, right? So I've been wondering, like, is the roots of SJWism really just what happens when Christian people no longer have a good theology and no longer are able to and no longer able to distinguish. They don't say they believe in God, but in a sense they do in just a twisted way.
Well,
is it specific to Christians though? Because the SJWs seem to be coming from all different groups of people. I mean, yes, the liberal Christians seem to have been the catalyst for it.
I mean, they're winning converts, but I think the bulk of them are. I mean, I think the bulk of the force is like white, disaffected, former, mostly people that grew up in a former Protestant or Catholic home. Yeah. I mean, if you think about it, like, the aim is still, it's like the aim of it is the kingdom of God on earth. It's like this utopia where we'll restore the Garden of Eden through our climate change activism, right?
Or and then purging of society of all privilege or oppression.
Yeah, purging society. And so it's like, is this really a post-Christian society, or are we just like a perverted Christian society?
Like one that's or it's just, I mean, even that whole narrative that you explained is a religious concept. That's why, like, even some of the other biggest SJWs some even are minorities from like the Indian population. Which is surprising because that's not, predominantly not Christian, with Hindu backgrounds. But it's all the same, it's a religious narrative that, you're right, they are forming, because it's the whole identity politics issue boils down to a lack of a worldview or an alternative worldview, which is resulting in these conflicts that we're seeing, and only I would imagine, get worse.
Did you see this? Did you see a similar thing back when you were fighting the original communism? Was that sort of like the USSR and all that?
When you develop your worldview, you reinforce even your past, because it conflicts with your core. There's this truth in all of us that we know is like, this is wrong, and when we violate that, and going back to that Damon, when we violate that, we feel a sense of guilt and shame, and so what we do is we materialize false stories, but we accept them as truths, which justify our actions.
Right.
And so I think that's what's happening, and that's what happened in communism. Why you would have soldiers that could take pregnant women, strip them naked, and shoot them in the back of the head. It's like, how in the world do you get to a point where that's justifiable and that doesn't bother you, right?
Right.
Or, in the time of slavery, how did you get to a point where you could treat another human being as if they're no different than any other animal? And even today, you can justify punching someone in the face by calling them a Nazi, even though they didn't do anything wrong, and they're actually trying to promote peace and unity and stuff like that.
Right. It's this. You have because the ultimate truth, the lived truth, like we're going back to this different levels of truth, is the lived truth is your narrative that you form around your life and what's happening. And so really all of the sins are possible through a perverted narrative, sort of. This is why I've wondered if maybe we need to rethink how we explain Christ and like what he's accomplished, right? Because I've always felt like this was something, I think Nietzsche pointed this out well, is that the idea of like Jesus saving you through self-abasement is sort of a perversion, right? Because that's what it sort of comes off as, like Jesus allows himself to be killed and humiliated and all this stuff, which is true. And so Nietzsche was like, well, that just makes people, like, he called it slave morality. Like you think that the more worse you are, the better you are, which we see this now. It's like, if I'm really fat, that means I'm better. It's like fat acceptance, all this stuff. And actually beauty is bad. To be ugly is good, right? To be successful is bad. To be unsuccessful is good, right? You're virtuous simply by the fact that you are poor, right? Not like if you just don't have anything because you're a screw up, that makes you more virtuous than someone else.
It's occurring to me how badly Nietzsche missed the boat here as you're explaining this, because it's like, what about the transfiguration that happens, and what about the ascension into heaven, at the end of the Gospels? I mean, all that glory is stripped out of it. And so, it's interesting if you take the gospel and you try to strip all the spiritual and supernaturality out of it. Yes. All you're left with is the carnal side of it, which is the abasement and the humiliation and the death. And then that's what Nietzsche was seeing, because I guess he may not have ended at a place of being anti-supernaturalist, but it's almost like he started there. He interpreted Christianity that way and rejected it, and then later, I don't know, was he down with Jungianism and all this other? He was still a metaphysical guy.
Yeah. Well, Jung he predated Jung.
Yeah, but he I don't think he was like a strict materialist in toto.
No.
But he interpreted Christianity from a materialist standpoint, made his judgments, and then went on. And I think that's what people do today. Because like you were saying with looking at the social justice movement and how it's trying to scratch all these itches given to it by Christian culture and thinking, right? The idea of sin. I mean, some cultures don't even have an idea of sin and atoning for it, right?
Right.
But they're trying to scratch all these itches, but they're trying to do it in a materialist way because, that's they were raised, in school and through the prevailing culture. It's like we were saying a few episodes ago. Assimilation of other cultures into Western culture is happening. It's just not happening the way we, like Christian people, think it should be happening. So we say, oh, they're not assimilating. People coming from other cultures are not assimilating into our culture. Well, yes, they are, but our culture is not Christian culture. It's not even a constitutional culture or a moralities based on the foundation of America. It's this whole crazy other thing, and they're assimilating into that very well.
It's Thomas Jefferson's Bible where he crossed out all the supernatural stuff.
Yeah.
It's been that way since the beginning. That's like, this is the road we've been on. And if you think about it, capitalism and communism are both the same thing. It's the answer. They have different answers, but this answer is the same, is that life can be solved by material goods.
Yeah, they're trying to answer.
It's just a matter of how we distribute them.
They're answering the dissatisfaction that comes with taking a Christian and stripping away all his sense of the transcendent and the supernatural.
Yes,
and then it's super satisfying. Yeah,
which
super
happened in the
dissatisfying.
1800s, which is why maps exist, is to restore the magic.
There you go.
Right. That's what this podcast and this program and this organization is aimed not at simply, fiddling with the next election, which we will do through hacking, obviously. But we are trying to build an arrow to shoot straight into the heart of materialism and kill the dragon.
There you go.
That's the main thing that we're trying to do. Now, this is an arrow made of various things, philosophies and billboards and sumo wrestling, but it will happen.
Glorious.
But yeah, because I think the proper way to think of the Christian story is more of along the lines of a hero myth. I mean, like, you have Jesus goes down to basically that he conquers the ultimate bad guy, which is death itself.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And you go down to hell and you or to death, which Sheol, whatever you want to say, and he sets the captives free, which is the part where we always skip over. Like, if you go to Sunday church and people's like, and then he was resurrected, and they never mentioned, and also a bunch of people like that were dead came back out of the tombs when he did that. And everyone's just like, oh yeah, that's weird. But the point is, like, he goes down, the spirits that are dead, he unbinds the chains in the underworld. Right? He goes down to the underworld, to hell, to Hades, whatever, throws open the gates, and then they're able to come back. Now, presumably the ones that came back right then were the ones whose bodies were still intact enough to receive a soul. They just died sort of recently, because it's probably another layer of necessary magic to, like, reconstitute the body if it's rotted away to a certain extent. But all of the souls that were in the underworld were set free. And they came back and they're like, some of them were like, oh, my body's still here. Like Lazarus, who I always thought that was pretty crazy. Being pretty crazy. Like, oh yeah, I was dead and then I came back and then, but yeah, so that part of the story is never talked about. Like, it's what it is about is the overturning of the underworld primarily. Mm-hmm. But yeah, so I've been trying to work out how the souls coming back out of the underworld into their bodies figures into the whole thing recently. Number 15 probably knows about this from the reanimation chambers.
Yeah, so when we're talking about, like, what the soul is, I mean, that's some of the questions that I've asked you in the fort. And it's like, well, what do we mean when we talk about, like, what is your soul? And it kind of goes back to your main topic of consciousness, of when it comes out. I've heard it said, and I really like this idea, that you're the most true you, who you really are, is when you're experiencing stress, when you're under duress, when you're under suffering. That's who you really are. And people will say that's true in the sense that your real character comes out. Like, you'll snap out at your kids or whatever when you're under stress. Well, guess what? That's probably who you really are. And the same is true, like, if you're experiencing happiness, and just kind of like joy just kind of pops out of you. Maybe you laugh in a funny way or a quirky way, and people kind of point that out. But that was who you really are, deep down. And this is true in the sense, even like when they do MRI studies of people who are trying to learn new concepts. And when you're trying to learn new concepts, you're under a state of stress. Your brain is most activated. It lights up, which you're like, well, okay, yeah, that makes sense because you're trying to learn something new. It's like, yeah. But who you are is like coming out. It's manifesting itself in the material existence. But where is it coming from is the thing that we don't know. It's like, where's this outside force that's coming out of you while you're experiencing that? And this kind of goes back to something that you've kind of talked about in the past too, about, what's the purpose of our brains? Is it just an antenna that receives, life from the ether, from the outside? There's something beyond us. So
yeah, your brain. I think the fundamental way to think about the brain is it's an antenna that receives or collects consciousness. It's not a manufacturer of consciousness. But I would say soul, spirit, body goes like the body's the material. The soul is your consciousness, basically. I think when they were using the word soul, they were talking about consciousness. I think that's basically analogous. And spirit is your pattern of being, I think. Like you can say like, oh, I'm in the like. It's done in the spirit of the Baroque spirit or something. Like you might talk about a piece of architecture, or it's done in the spirit of Elvis. If you're channeling, if you have like you make a piece of music and it's sort of like that early rock and roll sound.
Yeah, or the spirit of anger. These emotions
Right.
that you're feeling.
Right. And so a spirit is a pattern that can become incarnated at any moment, but is not necessarily at any given time in inhabiting a body, inhabiting material.
But it can inhabit you. Right. When you say you're possessed by a spirit of, jealousy, right? You're exhibiting a certain pattern, but it's almost in a literal sense, like it's not you, right? People would say that's not you. That's something else that they're seeing coming out of you, right?
Yeah, like where all this comes from is very like I occasionally do artsy type stuff like writing and music and stuff, and like you sit down to write, let's say, or you sit down to play some music, and where does the idea for the next word come from? No idea. Like that's what Jung was so smart about this, because he said, he's like, look, you're only consciously aware of maybe your next sentence. But the rest of them are being formed in unconscious awareness, right? And they're being fed to you, like your thoughts of expressions, the logical trains you make, logical trains of thinking that you make, are all being built behind the scenes, and they just pop into the consciousness at like one sentence at a time.
Is this sort of is this like the argument that memory doesn't really work in the brain the way we've always supposed it has, and there hasn't really been a good biological proof for like we don't really have memories, every bit of our knowledge stored physically in little molecules in our brain, but it's like when we remember something, the metaphysical being that is cohabiting our cranium with our brain is dropping stuff onto the physical structure of the brain, and then it's being a part of that process.
Yeah, like that's the subconscious. That's what the unconscious / subconscious is. It's like, you know your grandfather's name, right? But you weren't consciously aware of it until I just brought it up. And then, like, if you think of your consciousness as like a spotlight, and it can bring to awareness things that right, and shine it on there, but you're not aware of it all the time, because that would be crazy.
Well, the idea that the things that I know or that I remember aren't physically stored in the organ of my brain, but are called up from some other place. That's kind of a hard thing to grok, I think.
Well, that would go back.
Your memories can be altered. They can be false memories, but those memories are also from connections and patterns, pathways to your brain, which there's multiple pathways that generate those memories. Depending on which one they take, will generate, more or less the truth in the sense of how it really happened versus how you remember it to have happened.
Right.
So if somebody has memory problems, is that a spiritual issue, or is that a physical issue, or could it be either way?
Well, same.
Okay.
Same. I think one of the things we got to get away from is this, because this all started with Descartes. I hate to go back to Descartes.
He ruined everything, though.
He did. Well, what they did was they said, look, and they really explicitly stated this. Like if you go back and read the old early philosophers of material of science and stuff, they explicitly state this. They say, well, look, consciousness and soul, we don't know how to study. So let's just focus on only material things right now, and then maybe we'll make some progress. And we'll leave that to the religious side, and then this will be over here. And it created this sharp division. Whereas beforehand, they viewed them all the same. And that has some benefits to isolate one part of something and look at it. Like obviously you can make a lot of scientific advancements that way. But this whole dichotomy was just an explicit decision made by some of the early philosophers about the best way to go about studying it. And then it sort of became like this dogma.
Mm-hmm.
They're like, well, you can't, like, we can't, because you can't study consciousness in the material way.
Well, you can't study it by measure and number, like the way that when Lucifer appeared to Descartes when he was taking a dump, said.
Yeah.
Have you heard this story? This is the
I know,
apocryphal story about Descartes.
Story. I
don't know that it was Lucifer, but it was an angel.
Well, an angel of light. An angel of light.
Every angel is actually the devil.
I'm embellishing perhaps a bit. This whole story is sort of apocryphal, but apparently Descartes was
it's 100%.
Sitting in the outhouse, pinching one off, and an angel appeared to him and said to him that the conquest of nature would be done by measure and number.
Yeah.
And that started his whole philosophy. It's like, okay, so we're going to build, we're going to understand the universe by things that we can measure and count.
Why do you say he was the devil? That makes sense.
And so that message and Descartes, what he's done with it has not been very good for humanity, I think, in some. So, and then like Sumo was saying, this idea that if we can't measure it, we're gonna let the church worry about that. And then as scientists took command of the culture, they just decided that the church didn't count anymore, and none of those things that they said, maybe we'll get back to. Well, I guess those don't really count. They're not really real. We're just gonna go off.
You can't fit them. They don't. Like if you think about it, what you do. This is how calculus was invented. Also, what you do is you take a net. Okay, so here's how science works. Here's how we work. You take the world and you divide it up into small pieces, and then you can count into countable pieces, right? So, that's how what calculus is, right? You want to know what the area under a curve is. Well, what do? You pretend it's a bunch of really tiny rectangles. You guys remember this?
Mm-hmm.
Right? You pretend it's a bunch of, because you don't know how to calculate the area under a curve. But you know how to calculate the area under a rectangle. It's base times height. Fair enough. Okay, so then you just pretend that the curve is made up of a bunch of increasingly tiny rectangles. And you just add all those up. So you just you basically make imagine like a net. It's a net is made of little squares, and you throw it over reality, and then that enables you to count reality, right? Because whatever falls in a given box is you can just sum it up. The problem with that, and that's like when you say like this is the number and measure thing, because it's this idea that if you only the things that are real, and I forget which one it may have been Leibniz that said that. I don't remember. I get these guys confused sometimes, but he said the only things that are real are the things that are quantifiable.
That's like the attitude right there. That's it.
That was a statement made very early on. Like if you go back and read all these guys, it's a very interesting how explicit they are in their in what we now just take for granted.
Mm-hmm.
I think I want to be careful though, because I think there's some truth in that sense that you can measure it. I love your illustration of a net though, because if you cast a net, obviously you'll catch some things. But like when you throw a net, the water pours right through the net, right? So you're actually missing like 90% of what you threw the net over.
Yeah.
But you caught something. You caught 10%. You caught a fish, right? That's something. It's not nothing. But you're missing. You can't just say, well, this is the be all end all of truth when you cast that net out over reality.
Yeah. Jung made an argument similar to that in his book, The Undiscovered Self. He said the problem with doing psychology scientifically is that it doesn't actually match into any individual person. He said, look, so, we make these scientific theories and they're of necessity statistical. So you go through, you look at all of the people and you take the mean of their behaviors and then you say, well, that's the theory. That's the truth, right? It's like, and he compared it to like, say I had a dump truck full of stones and pebbles, right? And I told you that, well, on average, they weigh 5 ounces. But then if you expect that if you go to that dump truck and you pick up any given pebble, it's going to weigh 5 ounces, you're going to be really disappointed. Because there might not be a single pebble in the whole thing that weighs exactly 5 ounces. Right, but nonetheless, the average is true, even though it doesn't apply to any individual instantiation of it. Right, and that's because the net that we've cast over reality is a way of compartmentalizing reality into quantifiable forms. But that doesn't, and often doesn't, it doesn't necessarily, and often explicitly does not actually correspond to any individual. And so and his point was he would talk to, he said, when I trained young psychologists, said, all right, here's all the theory. And he says, but understand this will apply to no individual, right? This is the aggregate mean of all the things that we know about humanity and like all the patients we've studied. But yet any given individual is not going to fall into these things with any sort of, they may be a round peg, but they'll have sharp edges on the side that won't quite go in. And that's true of the whole universe. But we pretend that like this is like like the mass of an electron. Say we pretend like what we've done is we measured the mass of an electron several times. We took the average and said, "Oh, there it is. That's what it is." Even though if you look at the literature, never ever was it actually measured to be that exact number that we write in the textbook.
Nor has it been proved that the mass is constant.
Right, that's what I mean.
We just assume it is for the value of our model, for the benefit of our model.
We assume that it is. Well, we also have the Western mind, and I have this too, so I don't blame it. But going back to, Anaxagoras, one of the early Greek philosophers, they were like, well, listen, there has to be like one principle there just has to be one principle, right? There just has to be some unifying thing that makes it all make sense. And so it doesn't like to have, in some sense, it is just aesthetically unappealing for there to be different masses of electrons, right? It's just like, gross. No, you're all the same. And I also feel that, right? But you have to it's like when they measure the speed of light. So if you look up what the speed of light is, right, in a textbook, and it says this number, it's never, ever actually been measured that. That never happened. What we did was we measured a bunch of numbers that bounced around there, and then we took the average and said that's what it is. Right? And we just assume because we intuitively believe that it must be so, that it must have a flat number and it must unchange because that's the most aesthetically appealing. And I'm not knocking that. Aesthetic intuition is very strong. But you have to understand that this is a net we've cast over reality that lets a lot of stuff fall through. It's like the pebbles in a dump truck. Yes, we can make comments about the pebbles based on the whole average of them, but it may not apply to any individual pebble, and still also be true. Like it's still useful to know that they weigh 5 ounces on average. You can do a lot of things with that, but in another way, it's also not true of any of them.
Well, it's like at some point, like we were talking about early philosophers in the Descartes era, saying, "Oh well, we can't measure this stuff. We'll put it over here to the side." There's a difference there than saying it doesn't exist, or that's sort of like, assuming that the mass of an electron is constant and this is what it is, rather than going back and admitting, well, no, we actually never proved it was constant. We're just going to use this as a placeholder because that's the best we got. So one position says, I have total mental mastery of the nature of the universe, and the other one assumes I have a useful tool that will help me in some helpful predictive ways, but it's not. I know that I'm not getting everything, right?
Yeah,
so there's this pride. There's this pride that makes that jump, Yeah,
we have to remember that our model is not reality. Our model may be useful.
Yeah.
And often is, but it's not the same thing. Like we can draw a very detailed map of the land, but the map of the land is not the land.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yep.
And that's we keep our whole culture has gotten mired in this. That's what ideology is. That's why communism can happen, and like this rampant capitalism can happen, because we have this economic model, which is a map of the land, and it does correspond in some places, right? And then we just say, okay, the map of the land is it, and therefore that must be like, if the map says this, then that must be true. And then you basically, like, that's what an ideology is. And that's why ideologies are so dangerous. Because you've taken your map of the land, or as we said last time talking about dogma, your drawing of a tree, and trying to make everybody worship the drawing of the tree rather than looking at the tree.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a trap that we fall into over and over again. But yeah.
So how do you move beyond, because I would say the same thing is like you're forming a worldview based upon what you believe and you accept as true based upon the information that you've been given or experienced. But how do you not get stuck in an ideology? How do you?
I think some humility is required. For the same reason you don't try to explain the doctrine of the Trinity in some sort of comprehensive, fully explanatory detail, because you can't do it, and if you try, you just end up in error and heresy.
Right, and how do you go from there and not fall into the post-humanist trap of or the postmodernist trap of everything's relative, everything's unquantifiable, everything's too small, too minute, too specific to understand, to take it all in.
Well, I think you gotta accept the fact that there is a false dichotomy at work there, that everybody wants to fall into one or the other. They either want to be a scientist or a woo-woo dopehead. Everything's relative and nothing is real, nihilism, or pure materialism. And I don't know why this is, that everybody feels like they have to pick one side or the other. But I think identifying false dichotomies is a skill that serves everyone well, especially in this regard.
Yeah, it's non-dualistic thinking. Like, that's largely a matter of temperament. It's largely just like there are, like Alan Watts used to say, there are prickly people and there are gooey people. And the prickly people want to say everything's prickles, and the gooey people want to say everything's goos. But the reality is actually gooey prickles and prickly goo. On physicists, right? So like a prickly person says light is a particle, and a gooey person says it's a wave. But it's both, right? And this happens at every level. Like, so like you look at a piece of steel, right? Like, that's very solid and firm. It's there. It's prickly. Zoom in close enough, and the atoms are just this morass of space that has nothing in between them, and it's not even there hardly, right? It's like it's mostly empty space. So you get back to this gooey, I can't define where the electrons are, all the particles are undetermined, and I don't know. Zoom in some more, you get to the nucleus, you're like, oh, here's a hard part again, right? Zoom in some more, that's made out of these other particles that are again gooey, and then you go down. So it's as you zoom in and out, you're constantly shifting between hard, very well-defined edges and stuff, and then to this ill-defined blur, and that happens as you go up or down the scale of size and time, right? That's the way the universe holds together. Is the prickly parts and the gooey parts are holding each other up. You have to have both of them. It's like knitting, It's like, well, the warp and the woof, like when you do like the two, it holds together because one holds the other up. Mm-hmm. Right? If you take one out, then it doesn't make sense. And that's why the New Age people have taken out all the materialism, and that's why they worship crystals and build pyramids of spectral light beams. And then the materialists have taken out all the goo, and that's why they think that they if they just chop off their penises, they become women. And it's all because you have to have this union. As Heraclitus said, all things through the union of opposites. All things come into being through the union of opposites. Which is a very Taoist thing. But.
So if you look at this from an alchemical standpoint, one of the big things there was we're going to take something.
I always like to look at things from an alchemical standpoint.
We're gonna divide it into its opposites, and then we're gonna smash those opposites together to make something new. And so I think one thing important about our age is you got to view it as we're in the synthesis phase of an alchemical process / Hegelian dialectic. So I think really what's happening now is the world was split into the prickly and the goo. Those things were metamorphosed, okay, into something totally different separately, and now they're being re-smashed back together, which is why you see computer engineers in Silicon Valley talking about communing with space aliens to get the ideas from their microchips. Right?
Yes.
So it's like they're going. If you go back to the idea, I think we talked about it a few weeks ago. The material and the woo are two sides of a sphere, right?
Right.
And so at the top, where they meet at the top, is the proper union of materialism and spirituality. And then you do this division, and you start moving down either side in this false dichotomy of the world, where you're only on the spiritual side or you're only on the materialist side, and you go around to the bottom of the sphere, and there's this unholy union after everybody's been transmuted into something else, something totally whack. Then you smash them back together, and you end up with this antithesis of a functional society where, you've got abortion as some sort of a sacrifice to Dagon, and you've got aliens instead of God, and you've all this crazy stuff. It's we're now in the synthesis phase, and we're approaching like the other side of the sphere as a society, Western society.
Now, to note to the listeners, I don't think we actually discussed that on the podcast. I think that was Smokestack's fever dream of his sphere model that he sent me in a picture at one point.
You're probably right.
I don't think the listeners actually heard it. But
did I explain it? Did I explain it sufficiently?
Yeah, you did. But yeah, we are. This is that's one reason not to freak out too much. If this is the Hitchhiker's Guide, don't panic, because this is a natural process. This is like the pieces had to come apart in order to come back together again. Right? This is we're in the middle. This is an alchemical synthesis, as you said. That it's happening, and you just have to. There's no way around it. I mean, it sucks to go through, but because you think about it, you had stable worldviews forever, right? So like. I don't know. I mean, pick anything. I mean, you have Christian medieval Europe, right? And you have before that, you had the Shinto Japan, which was then had to integrate the Buddhist philosophy that came in. And so over and over again, you get this worldviews of a society become stable, and they basically encompass everything, right? Like medieval Europe, the church, there was nothing the church didn't touch. And then it just has to completely disintegrate. And then you come back again, because the gooey and the prickle go back and forth.
So are you saying we have to go through the antithesis before we come back around again to the thesis?
Yes. Yeah, you have to know the antithesis.
Well, that's depressing, because I want to back the truck up and reverse it and go back to the top of the circle.
You have to die to be resurrected, right? The pattern plays over and over again.
So now we're at the level of this is just the way things are happening, despite the ends of evil men and Rene Descartes and his outhouse angel. It's gonna come back around in the total course of things, back to the thesis.
Yeah, like because that's just another way of saying it's the will of God working itself out.
Sure.
But like you think about these, there's this flip. Like things go and then they flip. Like for instance, the sexual revolution has now gotten to a point where men and women can't even touch each other in the workplace.
Yeah.
Because it's hashtag Me Too, right? And it's like, and you need all these like layers of consent and contractual law for people to have sex. And like, how did the sex, love, and rock and roll turn into this thing? It's like, because every time you have a thing, it has to go and then it'll flip over.
It's funny, before the sexual revolution, we had a pretty good arrangement, a contractual law for mutual agreement upon having sex. Like we had something to cover that. Before.
We did, but all the things that we make must flip over.
Oh.
And I know that's depressing, but that's happened all through history. Is it goes and you make something stable and you get to a point and then you have to flip over.
Is that like the magnetic field of the Earth is going to flip one Tuesday afternoon?
Yes, it's like a magnetic pole. You can't have all North Pole. You have to also have South Pole. And if you try to cut off the North Pole from the South Pole, you just get two miniature magnets with the South Pole. Right? It's just like a law of, and that is to me the greatest mystery of the Christian theology, is that one day there's this claim that at the end, actually, everything will be good. And we'll be able to separate the good from the bad totally, even though for all of eternity they appear to have been, you can't have one without the other. And that's the great mystery, is like, how do you do these flips over and over again, and finally it ends up at some apoptosis or whatever. Not apoptosis, that's cell death. What do you call it when when the end of the restoration of all things in Greek?
Apotheosis?
Apotheosis, yeah. Yeah. What I said was when a cell dies, which is maybe similar.
Right.
Which is maybe similar.
Could be.
Sounds like a rap artist to me. Sorry.
Yeah, well, I mean, that could also be.
That's going to be our first album.
The cell death and the end and the restoration of all things are all related in the Godhead's mind.
The Maps Baroque Techno album, Volume 1, is going to be called Apoptosis.
Yes. Number 15 will be, he's an accomplished rapper as well.
Fantastic.
That's what the dreadlocks. It's more reggae, I guess, when you have dreadlocks. I like reggae much better than rap music. I don't know if you guys feel the same.
Agree.
I think of all of the music currently being made mostly by black people, reggae's the best. Mm-hmm. It's a lot more melodic, and there's like a lot of folk hit. Like Natty Dreadlocks is always in there. You know, Natty Dreadlocks, who comes. She's like a folk hero that comes around and brings you weed at dinner.
I'm not familiar with this lady. Sounds nice though.
Guess who's coming to dinner? Natty Dreadlocks. Oh, Natty Dreadlocks, best song. He comes around, you're having dinner, and then just a knock at your door, and Natty Dreadlocks, which I think means natural dreadlocks, shows up, and she just gives you all the ganja.
Is this like Caribbean Santa Claus myth or something?
Yeah, it's like a Caribbean Santa Claus myth, and they sing about her all the time. But yeah, that's it. That's the way it happens, because this is the working out of the unconscious, I think, which is why we got to talk about dreams. Number 15, please tell us your method of dream interpretation.
The internet. No. Well, no, I mean, there is some truth to it. So, let's start off with common dreams that you've experienced, are reoccurring dreams, and has there been any truth to what you've read as what that could symbolize? So I'll give one that apparently is a common dream. Is over throughout my life, I've had dreams of my teeth falling out. My teeth crumbling and falling out of my head, or I'm pulling them out individually for some bizarre reason, and I don't like freak out about it. I'm just kind of like, oh, dadgummit, I've lost another tooth, and now I'm, just gonna I'm gonna be toothless. But what that dream often symbolizes is a mental. You're facing a paradigm shift in your life. You're about to relinquish one view that you had previously to accept something different, because the reason why that is because as you grow from adolescence to adulthood, you're physically changing, and you're accepting on new roles, new world views, new your new life, I guess, because you're no longer a child, you're becoming an adult. Same thing happens when you're accepting way you used to see the world versus how you're seeing the world now. And I think there has been some truth, there is some patterns enough to see that there's some truth that you can research what these typically symbolize. I don't think it's always true, like your point. It's not always specific, in that context, like this is exactly what your dream means. But there's been enough, obviously, parallels that we've all experienced to say, well, this pattern typically means this.
Yeah, well, my thing here's how you interpret dreams. I by the way, don't want to brag, I'm a pretty expert dream interpreter. But here's how you got to think about it, is like, in the dream logic, if a thing produces the same emotion, it is the same thing. Mm-hmm. Right? So I'll tell you about a dream I had. I went through a time in my life where my professional life was very unstable. I thought I might be let go at a time. I thought I might need to change jobs. It was very anxiety provoking, right? And so I had a dream, and I was trying to work out why I felt this way. And I had this, so I go to sleep that night and I have this dream where I am going to do a regular thing I do at work every day, except it's at the top of this tower, right? And climbing up the tower feels very unstable. And as I'm walking across the floor is giving way underneath me, right? And then that's as I approach the end, the task I got to do at the end of the hallway at the top of this crumbly, wavy tower, I see these little black demon-looking things, very diminutive, just hammering away at the pillars of the tower, making it unstable, right? And so what that dream is sort of symbolizing, and this is why I say like the images, your subconscious speaks in images. It's like it's a pre-linguistic mind. Or maybe a post-linguistic mind. I don't know.
No, I think that's probably right. Pre-linguistic.
Yeah. And so the image of like I'm in an unstable situation emotionally and like in a metaphysical way in my professional life translates to the same feeling as being in an unstable tower that's about to crumble and crush you. And then you see like it's because there's these little things you got to take care of that are like nailing at the foundations, right? And that's what's causing it, right? And so that's one of the ways you got to think about when you're talking about trying to get in touch with your subconscious. Like if you're a prickly person and you need to get some more goo in your life, one of the ways to do it is to listen to your subconscious. And if you're a gooey person trying to get some more materialism, that's the same thing. Because it'll always tell you the compensatory thing. Like what you're missing will be brought up in your subconscious, which often comes through in dreams.
And this is true in that psychological sense. Like there's this triune idea of like how these things are all interconnected. So, we observe your actions. Those actions always stem from an emotion that you're experiencing. Those emotions that you're experiencing always stem from a thought. Oftentimes we find ourselves trapped because you and I and everybody else has probably experienced those points where you're frustrated about something, but you don't know why. And you're just like, you got a lot of stuff going through your head, but you're like really distraught about, everything that's going on in your life. And you can't get through it until you put a thought to each of those feelings. It's like, well, I feel this way because of this. And it's because of this that I was thinking that, right? And so you can trace back all those feelings to actual thoughts and experiences. Like that's why I say it's a triune where those actions resulted in those thoughts, which resulted in feelings, which resulted back into actions, and so forth. And your dreams, like you're pointing out, those are feelings that you're taking from your experience in life. You're experiencing those similar feelings, and your brain is reimagining them in a different scenario, but it's the same thing. You're experiencing these feelings, and you can see, as you pointed out, that you can draw these parallels as to, well, that makes sense. It's because of I'm not taking care of all the small things in my own life, which could result in catastrophic failure, my life falling apart, by focusing in on those small things, knocking off all those little demons who are trying to tear apart my life. Then I don't have to worry about the tower falling over and me falling to my death.
Yeah, and you gotta. I've been amazed at the ability of dreams to speak. Like one of the things you gotta do, for some reason, your dream is hard to remember. When you wake up, it rapidly recedes to amnesia. So if you want to catch what it's saying, you gotta wake up, write it down right then. Which I sometimes do, and sometimes I'm like, it didn't seem like an important enough dream, so I don't pay attention to it, right? Some of them really hit you, and some of them are like, But I'll tell you another one I had, and this explains the sort of levels of layers of meaning that it'll produce. Is that I was at this was a different time, but I was wondering if I had made right decisions in my life, and I was constantly. It was one of those times where I was like thinking about, what it would have happened if I'd have taken path X instead of path Y. And I got sort of fixated on that. So then I had a dream, and I was outside of a building at my college where I went to college. And there in the front was a guy we talked about in a former podcast, Grant Wilson, who was from the show Ghost Hunters.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
And I see him talking, and he's talking about looking for ghosts. And then in my head, I go into his eyes and I take over his body, right? And this is symbolizing that I am looking for ghosts. I'm hunting ghosts, right? I become the ghost hunter outside of the college, right? So it's like this moment where I made all these decisions that focus my life in the dream, and I'm worried about them. In the dream, I go into the consciousness of the ghost hunter, like that's his title, And then I am outside that place, and I begin running around. And as I'm running, I'm dodging these like mortar shells that are firing into the water. But I realize they're also fireworks from like a New Year's celebration, right? And so it's like this idea that it's a new year, it's a new dawn, but there's all these pitfalls that could also kill you. And I made these decisions running around. I'm dodging all these different pitfalls and these things during the New Year celebration, during the time that you make new decisions, right? And that this happened, and now me going back and trying to think, like, did I do good? Did I do bad? It's just me being a ghost hunter. I'm going back and I'm just chasing after ghosts of what could have been, but it ultimately doesn't have any. Like in the dream, I just kept running forever and ever and ever, and I got the sense that this will never stop. It'll never stop. I'll just have to keep running forever around this building, dodging these things. And the point of the dream that my subconscious was telling me is that this road of thinking has no end, right? There's an infinite number of possibilities that you could have happened. It doesn't matter. Those are all ghosts in the past that did not happen. So just to go on from here, right? And so
what's fascinating in what you're saying is the way you would interpret your dream is if you and how you could use it to your benefit to understand your life is to treat it as if it's real and speak to it and just and ask questions like, well, what if I had done this in my dream? What would that mean? And you can, by asking your questions and treating the dream as if it was real, it would then you could then understand, well, how could I apply this to my own life by treating as if it was true.
Yeah.
Like what you did. It's like, well, just quit running. You're going to be running forever if you're in this situation. Get out of it.
Yeah. And so the thing you got to do in dreams is look at and it takes you a minute to understand it. Like it's not immediately apparent to you when you wake up what the dream means, but you write it down and then you think when I first wrote this down, I was like, okay, I saw Grant Wilson, and then I went into his eyes, and then I'm running. What the heck? And that's why people think it's random, but it's not random. It's an image. Because what? I got to thinking, well, this guy is the ghost hunter, and I became the ghost hunter. It's like, okay, that's an interesting thing. I'm a ghost hunter, and I'm hunting ghosts, but then I'm also dodging these pitfalls at this place of my, youth that had a lot of decision-making processes, right? And it's in this process, and that took me a couple of hours of thinking about it throughout the day for it to dawn on me what the answer was. And that is fascinating that your subconscious is giving you an answer that you don't immediately understand, but it actually is coherent, right? Like that's the thing that I don't understand how it works.
Like where do those answers come from?
Yeah.
Right? Somehow that answer was within you, right?
Right.
And that, what was it? It was Socrates that, I can't remember the exact thing of how he said is basically, all answers are within you. You just sit around and listen for them. Or it was something along those lines. I can't remember the quote that he said, but it was something along that.
Yeah, it's true.
That's why he would always speak in terms of questions.
Yeah, it's true. Like it's a very strange thing. Like that's a very long mystical tradition. Is like if you want insight, just go sit in a dark room for a while. Yeah, right, and then eventually the answer will come to you. Maybe aided by psychedelic substances, maybe not. But like the Druids had this thing where that they wanted to ask a question of the gods, they would go into a cave and have someone rest a heavy stone on their chest, making it difficult to breathe, and that person would leave. And so they would sit in this like half asphyxiated state for hours and hours and hours in the darkness, and this would somehow produce answers to questions. Like this is it's a form of divination. It's the same as like dreams, and I wonder like you're producing an altered state basically that then allows your consciousness to settle down for a while so your subconscious can speak. And I wonder why or how modern religious communities have gotten to where they totally discount dreams, given that in the Bible, dreams are often the way through which God speaks.
Yep.
And it never said like, oh, that's going to stop. In fact, it says the opposite. It says your young men will dream dreams, right? It says like, that's actually, you should pay more attention to it. And now like, I don't know. I've never heard a sermon on how to interpret your dreams these days. I don't know if either of you have. Of course, Smokestack has it because he lives in a hermetically sealed bunker and can't go out. But
it's true.
It's not so hermetically sealed after the Jesuit attack, which is we gotta move him later today.
We're gonna coat it in wax. It'll be all right.
Yeah. Well, they already know where you are, so there's gonna be another attack. We gotta move you.
Okay. we'll take
But-
care of that.
But yeah, so it's like, where do these? The dream thing is such an interesting thing, because something that is you, but also isn't you, tells you something in a highly symbolic language that turns out to be meaningful and helpful. And people just don't like. Even Terrence McKenna, the psychonaut extraordinaire, said if we could just get people to pay attention to their dreams, there'd be no need for psychedelics.
Oh, that's interesting.
He said because that's the same. It's the same experience coming through.
Huh.
So yeah, I don't. So some basic examples to help people with their dream interpretation. Here's some classic ones. Okay, one, you are in your house and you discover a new room in your house that you never knew was there. Classic dream. Have had that dream. That's a way your subconscious is telling you there's something in your very intimate life that you don't know about, right? That could mean like in your immediate family, because it's your house, right? It's the place where you always are, but there's a room you never discovered, right? And that means that it may be someone in your family has you've detected subconsciously that they have some secret they're keeping from you. They have some problem they haven't admitted. I knew a guy. He had that dream, and he discovered there was this room in his house he'd never seen before, and he goes in there. And when he goes in there, his mother is there, and she says, "Oh, hello, person X, son." And then the room starts to fill with water till they both drown. Right. Ooh. And then he was like, "What does that mean?" And so then he goes to his mom and he talks to her about it, and he found out that she had been diagnosed with cancer some months before, but hadn't told him.
Wow.
But he had subconsciously picked up on something is very wrong with mom. Like her mannerisms are different now. Right. But she didn't want to freak him out. But he had detected this. And so in his dream told him this, like, oh, look, there's a part of your intimate life you're part of your home that you haven't researched. Like there's a new room. And if you go in there, there's his mom, and his mom filling up with water, and they both drown. So
yeah, isn't it you saying that basically our dreams are our mind telling us the things that we don't want to see or the things that we don't want to know? It kind of forces us to accept it. It forces us to look. Like, because when you have a dream, you don't have any control over the situation. Like it's happening whether you want it to or not, and you're kind of along for the ride, and your mind's going to tell you this is what's going on, and it's going to show you it. You don't have a choice in it. And so we have these dreams, and it's our mind's way of forcing us to wake up, which is kind of ironic because you're in a subconscious state or unconscious state. Your mind's basically telling you to accept what's going on or look at and to face what's going on, whether you want to see it or not.
Yeah, which is where the motif of the blind seer comes from. Like we all act out these archetypes, like the blind prophetess, right? Or the blind diviner in the cave of Delphi. It's like when you're the most asleep, that's when you begin to awaken to things. Like when you're asleep, that's when you're really awake, right? It's like when you're asleep, these things you've never paid attention to now come to the fore, right? And actually when you're awake, you're asleep. Or when Christ says, though seeing they do not see, though hearing they do not hear, right? And so the dream thing, Carl Jung wrote a book on the interpretation of dreams called, quote, The Interpretation of Dreams, which is very useful for this sort of thing. Freud had one on dreams too, but I don't like Freud. Jung and Freud had a falling out because Freud, he sort of agreed with Jung on a few things, but he didn't want to look too much woo because he felt they would not be taken seriously by the scientific community, which was true because when Jung went off into left field, everyone was like, whoa. But Jung didn't care. He's like, I think this is the right interpretation. So most of Freud's idea was that dreams were just wish fulfillment. Like you wanted something to happen, it wouldn't happen in real life. There was no chance that it would happen, so the psyche would compensate by giving you a simulated version. Whereas Jung thought, no, the dream is telling you something as best it can that you don't know about. It's your subconscious has more wisdom than you do to an extent. Right. Anyway, I thought Jung was better at dreams.
Hey, so what is this? What was your interpretation of Jacob's dream? Jacob's ladder, climbing up, the angels going up and down the ladder. I read that recently. and I don't know what to think of it. What is your
Well, I mean, angels, like there's we're here on Earth, right? And there is a heaven above us. There's a literal heaven of the sky, and there's also like a metaphorical heaven of like things, principles, ideas that are higher than us, right? And a spiritual heaven. And these are all really the same. FYI, future episode, angels are the same as stars. We'll leave that there for now. But there's, like that, the heavenly host is referring to the stars in the sky, right? Which are conscious. I know I'll have to discuss why stars are conscious later. But okay, another aside in the aside. That's why global warming won't happen, because the sun is conscious and will compensate and go into a solar minimum, as is happening now. Anyway, aside over. Aside over. But so you have this. But you need mediators, like you need levels that will carry things up to heaven. Like, so if you've got ideas, or say you've got like, you can't just grasp the secrets of heaven just brought down instantly. You have to have these mediators, these angels going up and down the steps, carrying things up to heaven and bringing things down. Right? And that's the idea of the stairway to heaven, which was, still is a very. Isn't it interesting that Jacob's Dream had 5,000-6,000 years ago was recently in historic terms, like one of the most popular pop songs ever, Led Zeppelin's "Stairway to Heaven." Uh-huh. It's these archetypal forms just persist.
Oh yeah, it's powerful.
It's very powerful. It's
funny too that Joseph, his son, was the one who was famous for dream interpretations.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Did you ever catch on that?
Yeah, I mean, think of all the dreams in the Bible. So you got Jacob's dream, you got Joseph the dreamer, who he had several dreams around him, both his own and others, like the prisoners in the Pharaoh's dungeon. You have Peter's dream with the net of animals. You have Joseph's dream about Mary. You have the wise men get told in the dream not to go back to King Herod, right? There's probably several others I'm not thinking about right now.
Well, you've got the prophets, which I don't know if they're dreams or visions, if they're one and the same or if they're different. There's a whole bunch of stuff from the prophets' views from those visions of, going up before God. And then John's, revelation of, the apocryphal,
right.
Into the world kind of vision.
Which goes back to this aphantasia thing. What if seeing a vision was just like the early versions of people that were able to imagine things in their mind, imagined objects? Like that was just like, it was like St. Augustine reading silently for the first time. Like maybe, because where does your imagination is a weird thing. Like these images come to you, this idea, and like where are they coming from? I don't know. It is like this idea of a muse. Like when you sit down to like write some music or write a story or something, they just come from the aether. Like these ideas just sort of.
Yeah, like it's often said that the greatest artists they don't set out to compose a specific piece. It just kind of comes out of them. They just kind of chisel away like out of a piece of stone, and then just as it starts to emerge, they just kind of go with it. Or the same thing with a painting. When you're painting a picture, you don't really know exactly what you're going for. And then just kind of what starts emerging, you just kind of go with it and keep going to see what comes from it. Right?
Yeah,
those are forms of art.
And sometimes the muse just doesn't speak and you can't do anything. It's very strange. And like, it's so real that it's mind boggling. Like one time I was playing with a friend, we were playing some music, and this happens a lot. Musicians know about this. And you're going, and we were just trying to write a song impromptu, and it was a silly. I think we were doing a riff on Weird Al. It was just a dumb thing. Right? It was just a parody song. And then I don't remember the lines, but I just remember that the word that came next was Tom Selleck, right? The actor Tom Selleck. And we just, without even thinking about it, we just had this mind link, and we both said, just like Tom Selleck at the same time, right? It was like the spirit had just informed both of us exactly what to say. And neither of us had ever heard spoken about Tom Selleck in years, right? But it just came, and this happens in music so often, where you just sort of know what the other person's about to do. It's very strange. Like if the guy's playing rhythm, you're like, oh, I hear he's about to shift, and then you just do it alongside him at the same time. It's jazz musicians are great at that, except that jazz is bad, but it's not very good. But I appreciate the technical skill behind jazz players, which is very high. But it's like juggling. It's a very complicated way to do something that's not very entertaining, you know. But I feel jazz is the. It's the same thing about heavy metal. Heavy metal, yeah, I like some of it, but a lot of it is, if you look at like some sheet music of a heavy metal scored out, it is like insanely complicated. But then it's not very nice to hear, you know. But like the amount of the technical skill involved in creating it is very high, but the product is not the best. Same with jazz.
A friend of mine is a big Tool fan, and he goes on about, you know, the technical competence and the incredible skill level that they use in producing it. And I said, well, it's just not, it's ugly. it sounds ugly. Like, yeah. It's highly technical, but it's ugly.
Yeah, some of these guys are like the best guitar players that have ever lived. Yeah. Like if you look, it's like they're playing in like 7/64 time signatures, and they're you know, they're doing 800 beats a minute, and it's just insane.
Well, if you take this is interesting though.
It's like, oh man, that's too much.
So take a person and strip away their aesthetic sense, which I would argue has been done in modernity.
Yeah,
to a large degree. We talked about architecture; it's all part of that. But you know, then what is somebody going to find interesting in the place of satisfying an aesthetic sense that isn't really functioning? It's going to be like novelty, shock value, high degrees of complexity. You know, so they sort of are like a surrogate for beauty in the absence of the ability to perceive beauty. And I think a lot of music kind of goes along with that.
So many of our problems could be solved if we just had better taste.
Yeah.
Honestly, it's like 90% of it. Like the answer to a lot of these things, like I saw this lady on the Twitter the other day, the Twitter, and she was like, can anyone tell me why? And it was like this big discussion that got on there. You know, it's so many retweets and stuff. Why bestiality is wrong? Like, what does it matter? You know, and the answer, people were trying to make all these moral arguments, which no one agrees with. And the answer is, it's gross.
Yeah.
It's weird. It's just aesthetically unpleasing. Mm-hmm. Like, just have better taste, woman. Like, you know, like just like this is why Plato's idea of the beautiful, the true, and the good being the same is so powerful. Yep. It's like, okay, maybe you can't figure out what's true. Maybe you can't even figure out what's good, but figure out what's beautiful. And then, like, if you can't figure out two of the three, you can usually figure out one, and then that's good enough, because it'll probably be the same thing.
And eventually, you'll figure out the other two elements of it.
Yeah, it's like the answer to so many of these weird sexual things is like, because it's gross.
Yeah,
I don't need to make a grand moral argument about it. It's just you shouldn't be doing stuff with the place you poop out.
Right. That's why nobody ever talks about the physical consequences of conducting sodomy, because
male on male or male on woman.
The whole thing totally falls apart just in the aesthetic dimension alone.
Yeah, just don't do things with the pooper.
Yeah.
And it's like, why is that It's like, it's because people are in this mindset of like, well, you have only rational things matter, and you can't. It's like, and then you get in this wheel spinning thing. It's like, just have better taste.
Yeah.
Like, we wouldn't build suburbs if we were like, just had a modicum of taste about the way things should look.
Yeah.
And then it would solve all the traffic problems. Or it wouldn't, like, if global warming is real, which I'm not, then that wouldn't be a problem, because we'd be driving a lot less cars.
Right.
You know, all these things would be solved if people just didn't have the most kitschiest, like, taste imaginable.
Well, one of our primary senses, our tools for evaluating the world, has been stripped from us by René Descartes. I guess. I don't know. Somebody
No,
did
it
it.
wasn't.
Yeah.
I don't want to harp on Descartes, but going back to Descartes, the fact that like angelic spiritual beings interact with science is so true.
Mm-hmm.
There's even a good book I'm going to review on the next podcast. I don't know the next one, but it's called American Cosmic. Yeah. This lady, she went around and I don't know if you've heard, but
oh yeah,
she interviewed a bunch of people a bunch of scientists who have said that they are in contact with ultra terrestrials. They don't know if they're extraterrestrials, but they're ultra terrestrials, right? That have led to their scientific breakthroughs. Goes back to Prometheus giving the people fire, right? It's the same thing over and over again. But so you see this, like the benzene, the guy that discovered the makeup of the benzene molecule, which is a circle, right? Like that was a big puzzle for a long time in science. It was how this molecule could hold together, and his discovery of how it could hold together led to a huge amount of breakthroughs in chemical and molecular science. And I forget his name at the moment, but he did that. So he had a dream of an Ouroboros, like the snake eating its tail, right? And that was the benzene ring. Wow. And he woke up, he's like, and clearly it's because it doubles back on itself and connects to the beginning, right? And then he solved that issue. That was fine. Isaac Newton had some weird dreams and visions about his stuff. The guys that invented the nuclear bomb, this is a really strange one. They were stuck for a long time on it. And then this, this sounds so crazy, but they wrote about this. There was this fellow that would come into the lab and they're like, I don't know. And he'd just sit down and talk for a while. I was like, if you tried doing it with a different polarity, or what if you added just a little more activity on one side and then you brought them together and used a laser and they were like, and then he'd leave and they would try it and they would it would work. And they never heard of this guy before and they didn't know who he was. And then he left and then they never saw him again. And then there's all these very weird spiritual overtones in scientific breakthroughs that they never talk about.
Yeah. Oh, Jack Parsons at NASA's JPL, man, that guy was nuts. He was, I mean, that's a whole show into itself. Is Jack Parsons.
Jack Parsons. Yeah. The idea of the mad scientist is very true. Like Tesla and all these guys, like you have to be dancing a little bit on the fringes to make breakthroughs.
That's the truth. That's why we're not making breakthroughs anymore.
Everyone thinks that the way you do science is you go in and you try to form rational conclusions and you start with some evidence and then you get to something. And that's total nonsense.
The materialist scientific method has neutered
what you do
discovery.
What you do is you sit down in a fever dream covered in Cheeto dust and you realize what string theory must mean. And then you go back afterwards and you look for evidence of your mental hallucination. And if you find it, great. That's the way every single scientific revolution has ever happened.
Yeah. That, and I like your interpretation of how to handle moral questions. Just say, well, that's just gross. I don't like that. Yeah. So anytime you experience something in the science world that you're like, that doesn't make sense or it's not good, you're just like, that's just gross. It's ugly. We're not going to do that. And we're going to do something different. And then do something different and boom, you've created something beautiful.
Like hypothetical situation. You're working in a virology lab, let's just say in China. And your buddy says, hey, we should make something. Now, this is hypothetical. We should make a chimeric virus out of these other horrible viruses that could potentially destroy humanity. And if you have an aesthetic sense, you're going to say, no, I don't think we should do that. But if you don't have that, you're going to be like, yeah, we can handle it. Of course we can. I know what the mass of an electron is. I can handle this. You know? Yeah.
He's like, hey, what do you think we could put AIDS on flu? Right. And they're like, I don't know, but that sounds yucky. Let's just not do it.
Yeah.
Like de Broglie, the guy that there's a thing that the de Broglie wavelength, like de Broglie figured out that it was already known that the photon was both a particle and a wave, right? And then he was like, and he didn't. There was no logical conclusions to this, right? This didn't come from any systematic theory. He just said, "I bet that's true of everything." Ha! right? I bet all mass is actually also waves and particles. And then he works out the math of it afterwards, right? He just has this idea. He goes back, he works out the math of it. And then he goes and he gives his PhD defense, his thesis, and he says, all matter is waves. Here's the math. And everyone around there was like, can you prove this? Is there any way to test this? Very ballsy. He does this as his PhD thesis on something he has no idea about. And he's like, I don't know. Well, they said, we'll figure out how to test it and then come back to it. So he does. Turns out he was right. And then he gets his PhD and all this stuff. And now he has some constants named after him. And, but none of that came out of a logical deduction. It was just like, wouldn't that be the most beautiful picture? And then there he went. Afterwards, he makes up the math, and then there you go.
Which is entirely backwards from the way you're supposed to do it. Supposed to do it.
Yeah, supposed to do. That's because everyone is a Reddit level intellectual, which means you're an idiot, and they think like, I effing love science,
right? And
they sit around, they do experiments. Like experiments are to prove the fever dream. Yeah. That's what experiments exist for. Mm-hmm. You don't start with the experiment. You have the fever dream, and then afterwards you say, now I'm going to prove my hallucination. That's how it works.
But you'll have to forgive me.
In a monkey's head.
You'll have to forgive me for being stuck on all matter is a wave. You might have to come back to that at some point. All matter is
also. Well, all matter is a wave in the same way that particles are like the protons and the electrons, like in the nucleus. They don't have any. They're not like a little ball. It's just like a little. It's like a little probability sphere of where they exist. Like if you could zoom down close enough to a proton, it wouldn't be like a little ball. It's just like at a certain level, it would be a little ball, and then as you zoom in, it just blurs out into a goo again, and then because all the stuff that applies to the electron, like the Heisenberg uncertainty principle and stuff, applies to protons and stuff too. So all matter is this spread out wave.
Weird,
but it's also particles. It just depends on the level you look at it. Which the subconscious will tell you. This is how Jordan Peterson brought this up. 15 he's been following Jordan Peterson's career. Probably because Jordan Peterson has been in league with the Greys at some level. But I think he's recanted. But Jordan Peterson brought up this thing like, why is this double helix snake thing constantly in symbolism? And why did that turn out to be the structure of DNA? Right? So you already knew about how DNA worked, you just didn't quite know what it was yet. And that's another Watson and Crick, when they had that, they came up with the double helix after a night of drinking.
There you go.
They were out drinking, and then Watson was like, hey, it's a double helix. They're like, hey, that's a good idea. Let's go try it. And it turned out to be right. And so it always, you have to do a lot of substances, fever dreams, lie in a cave with a stone on your chest, then you'll make scientific breakthroughs. You don't do it the other way.
There you go. Which totally jives with American Cosmic, content that we'll cover later. But dude, high tech, super scientist, chip designer, being in contact with aliens.
Yeah, the author of American Cosmic, Diana, has been in contact with 15 fairly regularly. I'm pretty sure. Since he has a long history battling the Greys.
15 plays his cards close to his chest, I think.
He does. Well, the Greys were going to take up in the first timeline. In the first timeline, obviously, the Greys were successful, and they made a one world government in the year 2011, and they enslaved humanity. But 15, with his various secret organizations, used their time travel technology, went back in time, gave us some pieces to work out blank time travel instead of horizontal time travel, and prevented it from happening this go around. So we're all indebted to him.
Thank you, 15.
It's always a recurring problem, but he's still.
We're actually living in a parallel universe. We didn't actually fix it. We just.
Yeah. I mean, there's still that original timeline is still enslaved, but
yes.
You can't make an omelet without breaking some eggs.
That's right.
There's always going to be a few timelines where the whole world is enslaved. But as long as it's not ours, we're good.
So if we're still talking about dreams, I've got a book recommendation.
Go for it.
It's called A Dictionary of Symbols by a man named Cirlot, Cirlot. And he takes a lot of Jung and a lot of other people and makes this just handy alphabetical dictionary of symbolic meaning for stuff. So, for instance, teeth. Okay, you guys want to do teeth?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, I mentioned mine, so let's hear what he has to say about it.
All right, so teeth are your primordial weapon, okay? And they represent your ability of attack, expression of activity, sort of like almost a life force thing. And so the loss of one's teeth then signifies a fear of castration or of complete failure in life or inhibition.
Yeah, it's why we say, oh, that's toothless, right?
Right. And then he goes on talking about some Gnostic ideas of teeth being sort of the fortifications of the inner man. So if you've lost your teeth, your inner man is exposed or unprotected from the world, which all that sounds very scary. So that would, I mean, losing one's teeth is a scary idea in reality, but then there's all this deeper stuff tangled up with it.
I don't know. I think that's gross. I don't like that interpretation. It makes it sound like I neutered myself.
Well, you know, when you brush your teeth is the only time you clean your skeleton. So it's like it's your interior man that's visible to the rest because it's your skeleton. That's the only part of your skeleton that's visible. So it's your innermost self that's exposed to the world. Right?
Interesting.
So and you understand this subconsciously, but you have to think about it consciously to bring it to the fore.
So if your teeth are falling out, you're losing part of your inner man?
Yeah, or your testicles or whatever. I don't know. I don't know what 15 has gone through since he's been attacked, but he's been abducted several times and I'm sure probed. So I don't want to explore what happened to him. I just know that we're helping people. The wiki's going to get off the ground. And 15 is going to help me. The reason I had to bring him in is because to transport Smokestack to his new underground base in the hermetically sealed containment unit, which 15 has, because it's very difficult transporting clones without an immune system. He's going to get coronavirus like that.
I know. I'm not looking forward to it.
It's okay. I can just reclone you. And you'll lose the last couple of weeks because I haven't backed up the memory in a while.
Okay.
But
I'm all right with that.
Yeah. Do you still want to be Jewish if we do it again, if we have to?
I want to try Nordic.
Okay. I don't have any more. I can do Asian or I can do Gypsy. Specifically Korean. I can do like a Korean. All the Nordic clones have been used up.
I'll take Korean.
What you do is you grow the clones in vats and then because if I were to start now, I'd have to wait 30 years for your body to be ready.
So they're just
you start
sitting
from
in
a
the
long
hopper.
time ago, and then they have blank minds, and you import the mind. It's a very complicated process. But 15 knows all about it. He invented it back with the Bilderberg group, before he defected.
Sumo, do you want to hear about your tower?
Sure, I'll hear about the tower.
Your dream tower. So the tower represents the method of ascent to higher things, right? Higher knowledge, higher states of being. Okay. Also symbolic of the alchemist's furnace, wherein things are transmuted and transformed. And so if you've got little monkeys, little demon monkeys eating at your tower, your pursuit of higher knowledge is being threatened. Mm-hmm. Right? It's under attack, and you're being held back by these little demons, preventing you from ascending the knowledge tower.
Oh yeah. At the same time, I had a similar dream around the same time period where I was in a rocket and I kept trying to get to space, but it would go up halfway and fail and fall back down to Earth. So my attempts at ascendance and transcendence were constantly being foiled. Right. Now the problem with Freud, again, that's why Jung is so much better, is Freud would interpret both of those as penile problems.
Yeah, that's why I don't like Freud.
Your penis is crumbling the tower, and then you have this failure to launch ejaculation.
Freud is gross. That's why I reject him. Yeah.
Freud had sex on the brain too much.
He did.
He had a lot. He came up with the Oedipus the Oedipus complex, where you wanted to have sex with him, and it's like, Freud, is that really everybody, or is that just you?
I think it was just him.
It was just him.
I think it's because he must have been sex deprived.
He did a
was
lot of coke too, didn't he?
all of his sexual emotions, and it was coming out in other ways. It was just kind of exuding out of him.
Yeah.
And it comes out in his writings and his thoughts, and become gross. You know, it's a messy process, sex.
It is, which is which is yeah. But anyway, 15. Thank you for joining us today.
Glad to be here, fellas.
I think we kept your identity fairly under wraps, which is good. There's the old picture of you floating around on the internet with the dreadlocks, but we can't. That cat's out of the bag right now, and I know you're looking into facial reconstruction surgery.
I can send a picture of me with white dreadlocks. I do actually have that picture.
Awesome.
I found it.
Good.
I will send it to you, but don't share it with the world.
I won't. Yeah. So I don't know. Maybe in like 2 or 3 hours, we'll meet at the Continental Divide to go get Smokestack and relocate him. Does that sound good? Are you up for that?
Yeah, because
The germs will start fomenting by then. I have to. The only reason I can't do it faster is I have to go get all the antibiotics.
I'm already starting to get a runny nose.
Yeah, it happens really quickly, and the Jesuits will probably be. But there's always problems with Jesuits. I keep a little poster in my office that says "Days Without Jesuit Tricks" on it, and it's always at 0. They're just every day.
Darn
but
Jesuits.
yeah, that was a good trend. 15 will be on in the future to some more to discuss his ongoing wiki project, which you can help fund through the Patreon that isn't as of this moment set up yet, but might be at the time that you listen to this, because these things come out in different layers of time. Also, you can do a Patreon just by throwing money into the river.
Yep.
I encourage people to do that to get rid of their attachment to money.
Out the window of the car, right? Just
I occasionally do this. It's a very strong spiritual practice. Take a $20 bill when you're driving over a bridge. Just let it go. Feels great. Very liberating. That's another way to contribute to our Patreon. Is just throw the currents will bring it where it needs to go.
I like that.
But we're the wiki project is first, then we're gonna focus on the billboard project, then the youth sumo wrestling project.
Thank you, 15. It was a pleasure.
Thank you, 15.
Bye.
Hamburger, bang, bang.
Every inch of you is amazing.
Every inch of